Have you ever almost gotten decimated by like a semi and had your entire life flash before your eyes, only to realize that you've spent like 90% of your life on the toilet and playing with action figures? That's it. That's all you've done with your life. It's honestly pretty sad, but you wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Those beautiful plastic fumes going up your nostrils, there's nothing better than it, okay? Anyways, all jokes aside, let's get straight into today's video because we actually do have some pretty big announcements. We're talking about some a leaked listing that I ran across regarding the DC Multiverse line, or just DC action figure line from McFarlane in general. If you guys haven't checked out Toy News International, it's actually a great website. I usually frequent them from time to time to see if I missed any action figure news. And so if you guys, as I said, if you guys haven't visited, just give a quick little peek. They actually have some great articles on there, but that's actually where I was able to obtain this particular listing. It's interesting that some of these characters we've been talking about now essentially since McFarlane acquired the license, and we still don't have them in action figure form, or in other cases I think we're getting like the end-all representations for those particular characters. So it's all very exciting. It's all like pleasantly good news. Now if you guys have followed this channel for any period of time, you guys will know that I don't like really covering leaked listings, but this one kind of really caught my eye. Previously, they did have some listings, but it was mostly just like obscure comic book references or just repaints of certain characters that I really wasn't, or I should say, it wasn't worth like an entire video's worth of content. But today we do have some absolute bangers, and I did want to start off with the Jack Nicholson Joker action figure from the 1989 Batman universe, or the Tim Burton universe. What's really interesting is, as I mentioned, we have actually been talking about Jack Nicholson's Joker now for well over 4 years at least, and we still don't have him in action figure form. There have been some like third-party manufacturers overseas that have tried their hand at a, Jack Nicholson action figure, but there's always something a little bit off, or they're not officially licensed here. It appears we're finally getting him in action figure form, and it only makes sense because we do have like Michelle Pfeiffer, we do have Michael Keaton, we do have Danny DeVito as the Penguin, so on and so forth. Like, we've received essentially all of the core characters, and we still don't have a proper Joker from that universe, and we're finally getting him. Now, what's interesting about this listing, and I guess there are two possibilities here. The first one is they're just beefing up the listing a little bit by throwing in the whole inspired by Jack Nicholson tagline, and that kind of makes sense on the surface. As I said, maybe they just wanted to describe the character or the action figure a little bit more, and they threw in that little phrase. But there's also the second possibility, and this is the one that I'm leaning towards the most, and that is that they were not able to acquire the Jack Nicholson license, and so it's inspired by him, but it's not technically him. I'm assuming they're going to manufacture the entire body sculpt, all of the accessories, everything is going to be like one for one accurate to the actual film, but then the actual portrait or the face sculpt is not going to look like Jack Nicholson. It's an absolute tragedy. Most of us would have paid through the nose just to get a Jack Nicholson in their displays, but unfortunately, I don't think that it's going to play out that way. I have heard that a lot of it has to do with the licensing rights and how expensive Jack Nicholson is as an actor. I'm not sure exactly who's managing that or why it's so expensive, but it just is what it is. I'm sure McFarlane tried his best. He went in there, tried to do the math and figure out whether it was financially viable to actually purchase the licensing rights and then manufacture the collectible. But as I said, it just probably doesn't make any sense financially. The most interesting part about this, and a lot of collectors were actually commenting this in some of my videos, but they actually made the assumption that that's why the whole theatrical edition wave from the 1989 universe or the Tim Burton universe did not come with as many accessories, because maybe they were going to pull back on the accessories and the extras as much as they possibly could, just to kind of save a little bit of extra money for the Jack Nicholson likeness. But unfortunately, it appears even that wasn't enough to be able to acquire the likeness rights. So I don't know, it's really sad, but at the same time, we can't have our boy McFarlane going out of his way to, purchase the rights, pay through the nose, and then take a loss on the collectibles, or just the margins would have been too razor thin. I'm not 100% sure why it is that things are playing out the way that they are, but it's really sad. And unfortunately, it appears that it's just going to be a character that is based on that particular film, but isn't going to have any of the likeness from Jack Nicholson. But you know, it does come with a removable hat. I'm hoping it does come with some soft goods. If we're not getting the likeness, at least go all out with this particular figure. On a side note, I would like to reiterate this is a theatrical edition release, meaning it's going to have that extra price point. So you're probably going to be paying about like $35 to about $38 for this figure. So just be prepared for that extra markup once the pre-order date is actually announced. Next up, they also announced the Henry Cavill Theatrical Edition action figure. This is kind of an interesting listing because we have received him at least, like 3 to 4 different times. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is probably going to be the end-all Henry Cavill Superman in a lot of displays. Again, theatrical edition tagline, that means extra accessories, maybe a wired soft cape, some face plates, extra hands, an action figure stand. Now, I do feel like he's been cashing in on the SnyderVerse recently. Maybe a lot of it has to do with nostalgia or the fact that he feels like there is still a lot of support for that Snyder universe. And honestly, I understand why. There were a lot of people that were sad when they moved on and James Gunn decided to reboot the entire DC cinematic universe. A lot of people, including myself, do consider Henry Cavill to potentially be like the best Superman of all time. And so this particular collectible definitely makes sense. Although I will say, does that mean that he's going to come back around and make theatrical edition releases for all of the figures? Maybe an Aquaman, a Wonder Woman based on the SnyderVerse, so on and so forth. Only time will tell. But he's definitely cashing in on this particular Henry Cavill. I think the only way that this makes sense, at least in my personal humble opinion, is if he actually goes all out. It shouldn't be just a classic repaint and ship out type of situation. They should actually pour it in as much effort as they possibly can into this. Extra face plates, brand new head sculpt, brand new accessory pieces. As I mentioned, a wired soft cape. Those are the bare minimums if they're going to expect the collectible community to pay that markup. Again, it's the theatrical edition line, so you'll be paying about $35 to $38 for this figure. But it could potentially be like the end all, I think, for most collectors wanting a Henry Cavill Superman for sure. There was also a listing for a theatrical edition Christopher Reeves action figure coming from McFarlane. And honestly, I'm a little bit confused here because there was already a collector's edition line Superman figure. So is this an alternate look for the suit, maybe based on a different film? I'm not 100% sure exactly what they're doing here, because we already got, at least in my personal opinion, what a lot of people consider to be the best Reeves Superman action figure we've ever gotten. You know, the extra face plates, if I'm not mistaken, wired cape, extra hands. It's very similar to the Henry Cavill situation, where a lot of people already have like their prototypical vision of that particular Superman. So I'm not sure exactly what more McFarlane could do here. So I'm genuinely curious to see how this particular listing is going to shake up in the long run. As I mentioned previously, the Toy News International website does appear to trust the source pretty well. So I'm just going to trust it. I think this is going to be a figure that we see in the foreseeable future. It's going to be really interesting to see exactly what they do here. Now, the most interesting part about the Reeves Superman action figure is that, if I'm not mistaken, it has already sold out through almost every retailer. So if you're looking to pick it up, you are paying that reseller markup. Is that maybe why McFarlane decides to kind of double dip with this particular Superman? Like maybe he feels like there's enough of a demand, there's enough of a fan base to go in there and give us essentially the same figure, maybe with some minor little alterations or some minor tweaks. Only time will tell. But yes, we will be receiving at least one more Reeves Superman action figure from McFarlane. Now, the last 2 Superman action figures that we talked about have already been released from McFarlane's universe. However, the next Superman, Brandon Routh, is actually the first time that McFarlane is going to try his hand at, and I'm actually genuinely excited for this. Personally, I wasn't a huge fan of the Superman Returns film and really anything related to that particular universe, but it still holds a place in history. It is still one of the most iconic Supermans out there. I love the suit design, I love the color tone, and so I'm kind of curious to see what this will look like in action figure form. And even though, as I mentioned previously, it's not my favorite rendition of Superman, I still think it's probably one of the most disrespected Superman like films of all time. And so I think McFarlane doing the deep cuts here, going back and giving us a Superman that is based on a not so beloved version of, you know, the franchise. I think it's a really nice touch from McFarlane. I've often given him a ton of credit for jumping straight into the deep end with a lot of his releases. It's something that Hasbro and all these other manufacturers, they don't do consistently enough. Usually they'll try to give you core characters first, and then they'll jump into like the D-list or the C-list characters. McFarlane, you know, gave you some main core characters, but he consistently does those really deep dives. He gives the hardcore consumer base what they really want, and this is a prime example of that. Nobody out there is claiming that Brandon is like the best Superman out there, but it's just nice that McFarlane is giving us or going that extra mile to give us one of those like C-list Superman versions, if there is such a thing. I don't think that any Superman can be considered a B or a C tier character, but at least in terms of like all-time great Supermans, he's always kind of down there on the scale. So it's just nice that McFarlane is going out of his way and giving us a brand new version of Superman in action figure form, which, by the way, isn't something that we're consistently seeing on this list. We're seeing a lot of reuse here. He's reissuing or re-releasing a lot of Supermans that he's already done in the past. So it's a breath of fresh air to finally see a brand new one on the list. The next part of today's video is essentially like a 3-for-1. You're getting 3 separate action figure releases for one particular project, and that is the new Supergirl film, which I think is set to release sometime next summer. It's very exciting. We're finally getting a live action Supergirl. That's a character that I don't think a lot of people expected to see in live action form from James Gunn, but that's the kind of director that he is. Let's not forget, he brought Guardians of the Galaxy to the big screen for a very particular reason. He likes those kind of obscure characters, not so well known, and this is a prime example of that. We will be receiving a Millie Alcock, a Supergirl action figure. I'm not sure if it's going to come with any like extras, maybe a crypto, even though we already got a crypto with Superman, but it would be nice to get. I've thrown this around for quite some time, but maybe an articulated crypto, maybe like a single release where it's just crypto in a theatrical edition line. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, okay? I would love some knee joints, maybe a ball joint at the neck just to get him into some crazy poses, but only time will tell if we get something like that. But yeah, we are definitely going to get all the bells and whistles with these particular figures because they are a part of the theatrical edition line, which is usually going to come with a much higher price point, $35 to $38, but usually it comes with extra face plates, you know, wired capes and all that good stuff. We will also be getting a Jason Momoa Lobo action figure. This has kind of been in the works. I've talked about this on a number of different occasions. I talked about it in a separate video where it was just kind of like me predicting stuff, and we did mention Jason Momoa in action figure form. Now we're getting like an official listing for that particular collectible. It's all very fun and exciting. And then there is a mention of his bike. Now in the comic books it's referred to as the Space Hog, so I'm not sure if that's what they're referring to, but he will have the vehicle that he's most known for in the comic books. That one will also be released. So it appears it's going to be a separate release. I would expect like some sort of 2-pack where you can receive Lobo along with his bike. I'm not sure exactly if they plan on doing that later down the line, but as of the moment of this recording, it's going to be a separate release. Now, I did mention this earlier, but it's going to get really intriguing moving forward because as far as we know, McFarlane should be losing the license going, and I know you guys don't want to hear about this, but going into like the end of 2026, Mattel's going to take over. We know this. This is old news. But what's going to be really interesting is whether Mattel will actually decide to pick up the Supergirl franchise as well, because that's essentially when, you know, they kind of shake hands and Mattel takes over. So, and it's going to be really fresh in everybody's minds. So this may potentially be like the last live action project from the James Gunn universe that McFarlane works on, like the Supergirl and Jason Momoa. That might be it. So it's just kind of something to keep in mind if you're collecting the DC Cinematic Universe up to this point. You do have a lot of great figures. You have the original Suicide Squad, the new Suicide Squad film, the James Gunn Suicide Squad, that is. And then you have basically any project that has led up to this point. McFarlane has, you know, thrown his hat into the ring. He's done the Michael Keaton universe, all of that. So it's going to get really interesting moving forward, whether people are actually going to continue supporting McFarlane or whether they're just going to wait out and, you know, wait until Mattel actually picks up the license. But just something to keep in mind. McFarlane should be losing the license. And so if maybe there's like a villain or a character that maybe McFarlane doesn't know about, because this happens from time to time, like they won't have the information up front. They'll just give them like the core characters and then they'll release those. And then later, once the film actually releases, the manufacturer will be able to release other stuff. Maybe McFarlane doesn't get a chance to do that, and Mattel's the one that picks up some of the other, you know, potential villains or side characters that will be featured in the film. We just don't know. But as I mentioned, this could be one of the last live action DC cinematic films that McFarlane works on. And honestly, it's kind of sad, you know, to think about it, to think that Mattel is now going to take over the DC cinematic, or just the DC line in general. I don't want to think about it. Let's just focus in on what's happening right now. Great listings, great figures. As I mentioned, there were a couple of previous listings that were leaked right before this one, but they were like really obscure characters, or they were comic book based, and I don't know, they just wasn't, I did want to jump into it because I felt like everybody had already made a video about it, but this one kind of, I don't know, was a little bit under the radar. I've only seen a couple of different content creators jump in on it, so I decided to give you guys my personal take and give you guys the listing as a whole. So if you guys are interested, just keep an eye on Toy News International, you know, Walmart, Target. I think eventually we're going to start to see some of these listings kind of trickle in. And McFarlane has actually been doing some pretty weird things where you'll see stuff that's actually in store way before the pre-order window. So that's going to get really interesting moving forward, whether that's something that he continues to do or he has a little bit more order when it comes down to his reveals and pre-order windows and, you know, street dates and things of that nature. But as always, this is just my personal opinion, my personal take. I'm very curious to see what all of you guys have to say. Let me know down below in the comment section. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you guys kind of spending time with us, chilling, relaxing, rambling on about action figures, because that's really what we do here. And if you guys enjoy that, make sure to stay tuned. So stay safe out there, enjoy the hobby, pose your action figures, play around with them, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.